The seal on the heavy blue steel drum didn't want to budge, even with the crowbar. It was October 1988, a grey, humid Tuesday in the industrial sprawl of a suburban town outside of Cleveland, Ohio. The air was thick with the scent of wet asphalt and the lingering metallic tang from the nearby steel mills. Inside a cluttered garage on a quiet cul-de-sac, a man was helping his wife clear out her late father's estate. Her father, Frank, or Manfred, as the older neighbors called him, had been a pillar of the community, a guy who played saxophone in a local jazz band and was always ready with a tool and a smile if your porch light went out. He was the quintessential suburban grandfather, a man who seemed to have no secrets until that crowbar finally gave way. When the lid of the first barrel popped, it didn't release the smell of old motor oil or stagnant rainwater. Instead, a thick, nauseating cloud of eucalyptus and turpentine hit the husband's face, a scent so chemically sweet and sharp it made his eyes water. He looked inside, expecting to find scrap metal, but as his eyes adjusted to the dim light of the garage, he saw something pale and unmistakable bobbing in the dark, oily fluid. It was a human limb. He didn't know it yet, but he had just unsealed a tomb that had been sitting in the corner of that garage for over a decade. And he had just started the clock on a decades-old mystery that would rewrite the criminal history of the Midwest. Look at this crime scene photo from the precinct archives. The edges are yellowed, and the flash from the old Polaroid has almost washed out the details. You can see the two blue barrels sitting there, looking completely mundane next to a stack of old tires and a lawnmower. This is the duality we're dealing with today. We're digging through Case File 71 Bravo, a collection of reports, grainy Super 8 footage, and coroner's notes that were buried under a mountain of red tape for 40 years. We have two men, both icons in their respective circles. One a beloved local musician and father, the other a high-octane racing champion out west, who shared a singular, terrifying talent. They were masters of the facade. They lived lives so curated, so seemingly underscore, quote, underscore, zero, underscore, that the monsters living inside them were never even suspected until the trophies they kept started to talk. We have the autopsy reports right here, printed on that thin, waxy paper from the late 80s. When the forensics team at the university hospital took those barrels, they didn't just open them up. Professor Miller, the lead medical examiner, knew they were dealing with something sophisticated. He ordered a full CT scan of the sealed containers before a single bolt was turned. This was 1988. The tech was new, the images were grainy, but the results were chilling. Inside the first barrel, the scan revealed a human torso, the head still attached, floating in that strange, aromatic cocktail. In the second barrel, they found the arms and legs, but it was the high-density objects showing up on the scan that stopped everyone's heart. There were nails and screws driven into the bone, hardware store items used in a way that suggested a ritualistic, sadistic fantasy that went far beyond mere murder. The medical examiner noted that the victim, later identified as a woman named Britta, who had disappeared from the city's red light district 10 years earlier, had her teeth missing. Her jawbone showed the telltale signs of long-term wear from dentures, a common marker among those living on the fringes of society in the 70s, often tied to heavy drug use or the brutal life of street-level prostitution. The man who put her there, Frank, had spent the years after her death playing his saxophone at community picnics. He was a man who everyone thought they knew. He had a wife, a daughter, a steady job in a cleanup crew. But when the police finally moved from the garage into the basement of his home, they found the quote, 1, that the profilers always talk about. Behind a heavy, locked door, they discovered a library of 32,000 violent, homemade tapes and a camera set up on a tripod. Frank hadn't just killed these women. He had turned his basement into a production studio for his own dark appetites. The police records show he'd been doing this since 1971, starting with 2 nursing home workers in Cincinnati who were his colleagues. He would hunt in the shadows of the city's train stations and bordellos, picking women he thought nobody would miss. The __2__1s. And then he would go home and be a __3_ for dinner. But Frank wasn't the only one playing this game. Now let's shift our focus to the West Coast, specifically Reno, Nevada, in the mid-80s. We're looking at a completely different kind of archive now. Glossy racing programs, newspaper clippings of podium finishes, and grainy VHS footage of a man named Tony, ___4_ Tony was a European motocross champion who had moved to the States, a local hero who spent his days at the track and his nights with his wife, a respected school teacher. He was charismatic, handsome, and fast. But Tony had a hunger for money that the racing world couldn't satisfy. By 1985, he had opened a motorcycle shop that was really just a front for a high-end brothel called the Neon Rabbit. The file on Tony gets dark on the morning of March 13th, 1986. A local worker found a woman's body on the freight tracks of the Union Pacific Railroad. She was face down, her clothes pulled in a way that was meant to suggest a random sexual assault, a staged crime scene. But the investigators, in 1986, were smarter than Tony gave them credit for. They found a trail of blood, tiny, microscopic drops, that led away from the tracks and straight back to the garage behind the Neon Rabbit. When they brought Tony in, he had an airtight alibi. His wife and 3 of the women who worked for him all swore he was with them the entire night. It was a wall of protection that stayed solid for weeks, but walls like that always have a crack. We have the interrogation transcripts here, typed on an old IBM Selectric. You can almost feel the tension in the room. First, Tony's wife began to waver. She admitted that she hadn't seen him until 3 a.m., hours after the murder. Then, one of the women from the club, Regina, broke down. She told the detectives a story that sounded like a nightmare. She said she was woken up by a scream coming from the workshop next door. She found Tony standing over the victim, a woman who had refused to work for him. Tony had beaten her with a heavy drive shaft from a motorcycle. Regina claimed Tony forced her to help him move the body, dressing the unconscious woman in a heavy coat to make it look like they were just helping a drunken friend walk home. When they reached the tracks, Tony didn't just leave her there. Regina claimed he forced a revolver into her hand, placed his own finger over hers, and pulled the trigger. Tony was convicted in 1987, sentenced to life in a maximum security facility. But this is where the archive turns into a thriller. Tony didn't just sit in his cell. He was a manipulator of the highest order. He started a PR campaign from behind bars, claiming he was a victim of a corrupt police force. He even managed to marry his former wife's best friend while incarcerated. He spent 6 years studying law in the prison library, obsessed with finding a loophole. And in April 1995, he found it. He convinced the authorities to let him attend a law lecture at the state university, escorted by 2 guards. During a bathroom break, Tony vanished. His supporters, women he had charmed from his cell, had taped a motorcycle key and a change of clothes to the back of a toilet. Tony walked out of that university, hopped on a bike, and disappeared into the Nevada desert. He hasn't been seen since. This is the blue ocean of these cases. The part that keeps investigators up at night even now in the mid-90s. How do these men do it? How does a man like Frank keep 32,000 tapes and 2 bodies in blue barrels in his garage without his wife ever smelling the eucalyptus? How does a man like Tony convince a dozen women to lie for him, to risk prison for him, and ultimately to help him escape into a life as a ghost? It's the anatomy of help. These serial predators don't just kill, they colonize the minds of the people around them. They create a quote 9 version of themselves that is so convincing, so quote 10, that the human brain refuses to see the evidence right in front of its eyes. We're looking at a final report from the cold case unit, dated just a few months ago. Using modern forensic tools that didn't exist in the 70s or 80s, they've re-examined the evidence in Tony's case. They found something the original team missed: microscopic traces of dog hair on the victim's coat, hair that matches Tony's own pet. They found traces of the victim's nail polish on a jacket Tony wore that night. The evidence is there, frozen in time, waiting for him to step back into the light. But Tony, like Frank before him, understood that as long as you keep the facade up, as long as you have people willing to hold the door for you, you can live a double life that lasts forever. As we close these files and put them back into the dark corners of the archive, you have to wonder about the houses you drive past every day. The jazz musician on the corner, the local sports hero, the good neighbor who always offers to help with your lawn. Most of the time, they are exactly who they say they are. But every once in a while, there's a garage that never gets cleaned, a basement door that's always locked, and a blue barrel sitting in the shadows, waiting for someone with a crowbar to finally find the truth. Until next time, keep your eyes on the quiet ones, because the loudest secrets are often kept in total silence.